Evelyn, thank you so much and welcome to a dynamic conversation. I'd like to introduce our panelists. We'll start with Councilman Paul Ridley. He was elected to the District 14 position on the Dallas City Council in June of 2021. Councilman Ridley attended the University of Michigan, where he received a Bachelor of Science degree and Master's degree in Architecture and Urban Planning. After graduation, he worked as a staff planner for the City Plan Commission of Kansas City, Missouri, and later for an architecture firm to complete the requirements to become a licensed architect. Later, he moved to Texas to attend the University of Texas School of Law in Austin. Following admission to the bar, Councilman Ridley practiced construction law and commercial litigation in Dallas for more than 30 years, during which time he founded 3 different law firms. He lives with his wife, Joan, in a century-old home in East Dallas. Councilman Ridley has been committed to public service in Dallas for more than 14 years. He served on the Dallas Plan Commission for 8 years, representing City Council District 14. And while on the Plan Commission, he chaired the Thoroughfare Committee. He also represented District 14 on the Landmark Commission for 4 years. Welcome, Councilman Ridley. I'd like to also introduce, yes please, round of applause. I'd like to introduce Councilwoman Paula Blackmon. Paula is running for a 3rd term for Dallas City Council, District 9. She grew up in the small West Texas town of Snyder and has spent her career in Texas public service. Some of Paula's prior experience includes serving in legislative and policy roles with former State Representative Dale Tillery and State Representative Harriet Etterhart, as well as a community representative and state local affairs manager for Dallas Area Rapid Transit. A lifelong Texan, Paula has been a resident of East Dallas for over 28 years. She and her husband, Barry, a Dallas architect, have 3 boys. Aaron, who is a Texas Tech graduate, coaches St. Thomas Aquinas JV football and works for Lockheed Martin. Evan is a graduate of Woodrow Wilson and currently attends school and plays basketball in Ireland. And Reed recently graduated from Woodrow Wilson and attends the University of Arkansas. Welcome, Councilman Blackmon. You can give applause. Councilman Adam Bazaldua. Adam is a dedicated father, husband, and representative. He grew up in the neighboring city of DeSoto and has been married to his high school sweetheart for more than 12 years. In 2013, they settled in District 7, where they're now raising their 10-year-old daughter. And for the last 4 years, Adam has represented District 7 on the Dallas City Council, where he currently is the chairman of the Quality of Life, Arts, and Culture Committee. He also currently serves on the Government Performance and Financial Management, Environment and Sustainability, Transportation and Infrastructure Committees, as well as the Ad Hoc Committee on Judicial Nominations. Adam is focused on the need for neighborhood safety improvements, solving the city's growing homeless population, and attracting local businesses that better serve each neighborhood's needs. Welcome, Councilman Bazaldua. Councilmen Jesse Moreno represents District 2 on the City Council and is also currently running for re-election. He is a lifelong resident of the district, a small business owner. Next page, you can tell they have some long introductions. They've done a lot. And a former park board member. As a council member, he can continue this work on a greater scale, focusing on improving the quality of life for residents, assuring accountability and leadership, and protecting our neighborhoods. He will continue fighting for families in the district. Every resident in Dallas deserves an opportunity for affordable housing and a safe neighborhood. Quality parks and schools are the cornerstone of a successful community, and Jesse has contributed years of work toward our parks and education system. As a small business owner, he understands the role of entrepreneurs play in our society and continues to advocate for resources and tools to impact the economy and community. He has a track record of helping community, putting neighbors first, and continues to make that his focus through accountability and transparency. Jesse, welcome. Councilman Moreno. So I'd like to kind of give you an introduction of this topic. So 345 is a freeway that connects I-45, which ends at the interchange of I-30, with U.S. Highway 75, known as North Central Expressway, at State Highway Spur 366, Woodall-Rogers Freeway. Very few maps actually display the road, and signposts on the road show U.S. South northbound, while southbound the highway is signed as I-45. In recent years, there's been a debate over whether to maintain or decommission I-345, and it has received increased attention. The interstate separates the downtown Dallas and Deep Ellum neighborhoods, and historians attribute the destruction of two Freedmen's communities, Stringtown and Freedmantown, to the construction of I-345. And so I just wanted to lay the framework of what our conversation will be today. And so my first question for our panel is, please explain for those in the audience who may not be aware of what is being proposed for 345. And for those that missed the previous panel this morning featuring Jerry Hawkins and Amber Simmons, who shared more about the highway construction and the Freedmen communities impacted and the opportunity for restorative justice today. And you can learn more about this on the exhibit floor. Can you offer, as a panel, a quick history lesson of what has occurred and what is at stake?
This is a physical barrier that was meant to segregate. This is a physical barrier that also uprooted and took away what was the most affluent black community in the state of Texas at the time, and it's now been probably the biggest poster child of our city for gentrification, which is now Uptown. And so there's definitely been a will and a desire to remove the physical barrier for the hurt that it's brought to communities, the segregation that it's done to our city. But at the same time, we are now looking at it from an urban planning lens, and it's being proposed not only to repair some of the wrongs that have happened in our past as a city, but also to open up development opportunity. And that's where I think that there needs to be a balance, and I think that that's where a lot of this conversation has been headed, on the difference of development opportunity of land that would be opened up. I used to live at the Mercantile building on Main Street, and my wife and I would often walk to Deep Ellum for, nightlife, for restaurants, and it's definitely not a very inviting walk. It's a long walk. There seems to be a long gap of within that walk that is very clear of a separation of two communities. And I believe that that's really where this focus is how we can most efficiently address the issue of more developable land in our central business district, connecting neighborhoods, while also addressing some wrongs of our past and intentional segregation that these highway systems have created.
Speaking from an urban planning perspective, it is an outmoded means of transportation that has divided communities. It's nearing the end of its lifespan, and we need to be looking for alternatives for the future connection of our southern communities to our northern communities. And so I'm looking forward to the opportunity to look at all of the issues that are raised by the possible demolition of this overpass, which is a visual barrier between the two communities, as Councilman Bazaldua mentioned. And I think that we need to reestablish the linkage between downtown and Deep Ellum so that people can safely and comfortably walk between those communities. And also, getting rid of the overpass will liberate a lot of land that's currently used in highway right-of-way for the development of housing, other types of development. We could create space for thousands of homes in the area that is now dominated by the freeway. And that could be a huge benefit to bringing people closer to where the center of employment is and to reduce the reliance upon the automobile and reduce the necessity of spending a large percentage of moderate and low incomes, people's incomes on the vehicle that they have to use to get to work. So I think there are many issues, there are many advantages to looking at alternatives to I-345.
So 345 goes down the middle of District 2 in most parts, between Deep Ellum, East Quarter, and the rest of downtown. To understand where we're going, to understand the future of 345, we have to recognize why 345 was implemented, why it came up. And that was a time during racial segregation. It was about urban sprawl. It was about separation, and divided and did a lot of harm to communities of color. And so now we have an opportunity to right those wrongs, an opportunity to develop housing, an opportunity to bring in workforce, and to be able to have businesses for people that look like you and I, people who had not had those opportunities before. And so this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. We have to get it right. We have to ask the tough questions. We have to ensure that what we're building today is going to be effectively be what's best for future generations. I want my 5-year-old and Councilmember Bazaldua's daughter to be able to live, work, and play in these environments. And so I look forward to more independent studies so that we can get those questions addressed.
Hello, and thanks for being here. It's good to see everyone again. I'm going to focus on what's at stake, because we know the history, we know why it happened, but I think we see it as an opportunity of not just stitching two communities together, but also looking at where it touches at the end and looking at that community, which is the one we're sitting in. And so how do we benefit everybody? And so I believe that we need to look at this not as an either or, but both and. We can stitch it back together, but we can also develop all communities that touch into it. My district is on that far east side. I don't touch in any of it, but I do believe that we have an opportunity of a lifetime to really look at creating these opportunities and looking at the cost benefit of it to see if it costs us this much, are we going to get that benefit? And maybe it's time that we invest in communities at a heavier rate while we look at this, this bridge is what it is, and then see it and evaluate it at that time. But what I would love is more information. We have all these, it seems like we have all these presentations, but nothing is with hard numbers. And so it's like, how much is it going to cost us? Who is going to pay for it? And who is going to benefit? And when I say benefit, it's the communities. Are we going to have retail? Are we going to have the grocery store that the southern part of our city has been dying and asking for? Is there going to be more housing? Are people going to be able to age in place? And so we should look at this as a community building exercise, not just as a road demolishing and understanding it from that perspective.
And so, Paula, you mentioned demolishing. We know that is one of the options, is to tear it down. What are other options for this 345?
There's quite a bit. I mean, and what's at the table is doing nothing and letting it rot, demolishing it, putting it underground, putting it as a boulevard, and then also, too, doing what is the hybrid. And the hybrid is kind of a compromise, if you will. It does bring it a little bit underground with some cross-sectional connections. The issue is which one gets us to that place that we want to be, and does it benefit us? And who is going to pay for it? Let's just be quite honest. These things are expensive. And so I think that's the question. Right now, TxDOT is saying it's the hybrid. People want a boulevard. And that's where I think we can have both if we really be thoughtful and plan it out and not just say, bring it down, boulevard it, cap it, or whatnot. I think we need to really go deep and understand what we're trying to do with this and do it. And I know it's been studied a lot. I think the road has been studied a lot. I would like to see, and we talked about this building of real estate out of thin air and out of creating these boulevards, this boulevard. But I think it's more than that. I think it needs to look at the community that you serve, Bazaldua. I mean, it really, and it was my son who told me that. God love him. You know, he's like, you need to look at it from all aspects, not just as a roadway in bringing it down, but we did cut off a community from, you know, it was flooded, and we've cut them off, and we don't need to do that again. But we also need to make it right from the years past. So that's a big equation to solve for.
There we go. So I think one of the questions we have to ask is, who does this benefit? Whether we do a boulevard, whether we do nothing, whether we do a hybrid option, is who's benefiting? And for me, if we continue what we've done and not invest, or continuing to invest rather, in the northern sector where our jobs are, we need to start creating and focusing more in downtown and in the southern sector, and making sure that we have a place where families that live have the option to work within a couple blocks from their home. I know that sounds that it's unrealistic, or it sounds that it's so far-fetched, and it's going to take time. It's going to take years. It's going to take investment, but we have to start at some point. And if we just leave it, then we're not changing anything.
I think I-345 has outlived its usefulness, and it needs to be removed. It's a blight on the landscape, to put it shortly. We need to focus our efforts on deciding what is the best alternative solution to convey traffic, but also rebuild that community. And that's what I'm hoping that we can do on the City Council if the Council votes to approve a new investigation by an independent consulting firm that can look at all of the social, political, and economic and environmental issues connected with I-345, instead of our just rubber stamping what TxDOT has proposed. So I am very open-minded at this point. I do want to see the overpass come down, but I also want to see further analysis of the alternatives.
So I actually think that one thing we all can agree on is that we'd like to see the overpass go down. It's what's going to happen from that. I don't think that anyone up here or on the council, for that matter, wants to see it stay. However, I think it's important to continue to emphasize the historical context. And I represent South Dallas. I represent Southern Dallas, Southeast Dallas. Majority of my constituents utilize this because by design, our city has allowed for almost all of our, more than 90% of our corporate workforce to be north of and need this thoroughfare. So, about a decade ago, we had a mayor who started an initiative called Grow South. And if we continue to ignore the need to bring the investment and the growth to the south while focusing on our central business district, we're yet again, maybe in a different context, putting my constituents to the back burner. And the investment is still staying outside of the southern sector. Meanwhile, my residents have to sometimes even use these thoroughfares to get to a quality grocery store, to get to resources that are best for quality of life. And so without balancing this approach to not only look at who it's benefiting because of what a consulting firm can tell us from a cost analysis now, I'm not worried about the economics now. I'm worried about the future of my constituents' economics. And if that is not at the forefront of this study or data that is being collected, then we're really missing the mark. Because we're still perpetuating a system that threw hundreds of millions of dollars into a part of city that already has hundreds of millions and billions of dollars that have been invested in. Meanwhile, my constituents aren't getting any closer to a grocery store. So when you look at urban planning, I hope that we can look at this one corridor as a more holistic, comprehensive approach of truly investing and breaking the inevitable separation and segregation that exists because of that design. But if we throw all of our resources and eggs into the basket of the development that can come to the central business district specifically, we're still throwing all of those dollars and investment into that part of the city and not down in the south.
And so I want to stop with what you just said, because we don't talk about the impact very much for Southern Dallas. And so I want to read a quote and get your response. In April of 2014, Michael Morris, the transportation director of the North Central Texas Council of Governments, created a controversy by suggesting that proponents of the decommissioning removal are predominantly white, wealthy, and do not live in the area near I-345, as opposed to predominantly Black working class South Dallas residents that could be affected by the decommissioning and removal. So much conversation we know has been about how it impacts Uptown and Deep Ellum, but limited conversation has happened about the impact for South Dallas. I'd love to know your thoughts about this impact, both positive and negative, on this community.
I would be remiss to say that there wouldn't be a benefit, but finding the nuance to what that looks like and how it can be leveraged to act as a benefit for the South before continuing to invest in an area that has all of the investment. And so there is, I want to make sure that the decision that we make and the expectation that we have to, essentially make one action or one move towards repairing the wrongs of decades of neglect is one that is not cart before the horse. Because right now, the reality is, if 90% of our job market is needing to go north of this is going to be impactful for my constituents. If we're not going to couple that with investing in job opportunity here first, then we're still missing the mark. We're focusing on the development opportunity around the thoroughfare that would be moved instead of making sure that, because one of the biggest oppositions I get from kind of pushing back on going to a boulevard route is, well, then now your constituents won't have to drive to the north for jobs. And I'm saying, well, that's what you're hoping for. That's a pipe dream in my eyes, because it's an expectation that's also going to require a lot of the affluent white billionaire money to develop that's going to be more tailored for my constituents. That's not what I've seen whenever I see investment in this city. And I want to make sure that before a decision's made at a council level, that it's considering my constituents' needs and figuring out how we can just as equally and aggressively bring in job opportunity further to our core and southern part of the city, versus just expecting that it's going to inevitably come by continuing to make decisions that more disrupt my constituents' lives than those that are directly adjacent to where this project would take place.
So on that, wouldn't it be great if we did both? You could invest in it in our communities, in our southern part of our city, in our south part of Dallas, South Dallas, and then maybe it becomes obsolete. People don't need to use it. And so maybe what if we kind of take a step back and look at it from that point of view is then it becomes organically a boulevard because it's not needed. Because let's be honest, when are we going to see this built? I don't know if it'll be in my lifetime. I mean, I'm just being honest. But it's like, what if we could figure out a way that we can invest in Grow South? And I do believe in that initiative. But then also, as we're looking at 345, that it automatically just needs to go away because it doesn't go 16,000 cars to 160,000 cars aren't using it anymore. So it becomes organically dead. And so I've been thinking through this as we've been talking about this for, I guess, seems like all our lives that we've been on council. And I'm glad that we're having these conversations and not just saying, go with here and not do that, because I think we grow as a city. Our ideas should grow because we are dynamic. Cities are dynamic. And to think it's stagnant and static is a falsehood. So we have to create some opportunities, but we also need to think about what we want it to be 10, 15, 20 years from now, which is why I'm still kind of going, how do we get there? How do we do that? And that's why I want more conversation, but I know that something has to be done.
Okay. Well, one of the things that I want to say I appreciate in this conversation is how you all are doing the both and. That you're not just saying it's this either or opportunity, that you are considering all these different options. One of the things that's interesting to me is, I would question the audience if they actually know where 345 is. If you aren't aware of the topic and haven't investigated, you may not even know where this is located. So why has there not been any signage? Could you explain, is there something to that?
Only TxDOT can explain that.
Right, no, so it's two-part, right, it's only about a 1.5 mile stretch where we're talking about, so you would have signage pollution and cause more confusion of where you're going. But that is a TxDOT question, that is a question, multiple questions that I've asked from TxDOT, but have yet received a response from.
Okay. So my next question, Paula, you mentioned about the 160,000 cars a day that use that stretch. It's actually, say it again. It's 180,000 cars that use that stretch of the road, and TxDOT projects an increase in traffic with all the proposed changes. So how are we going to absorb these huge traffic counts if 345 is torn down? And then my question is, what's the impact to other roadways? Because we see a lot of construction on 30 and 35 and all over the Metroplex. So what would that look like if this happens?
Well, in a perfect world, we would have mass transit that works for us, and we would have connections, multimodal connections, and then you would be able to live, work, and play in the neighborhoods that you reside in. That would be a perfect world, but we're not there yet. And that is our guiding principle and our North Star. But I do think that the objective with the 180,000, if it comes down, is going to have to be absorbed. And that's the magic question, is where does it get absorbed to? Does it go through our neighborhoods? Does it cut through downtown and making it more? Does it come through 30 as it's being rebuilt? And I think that is the hard one to do, because no one can predict behaviors. And thank God for Waze, because it just takes you to the most direct way. But I do think it's going to be, 180,000 cars is a lot of cars. But I do hope that if we can grow properly, then we won't need to have that roadway for 180,000 cars to go through. That's the point. Because if you think about it, it was built to get you through someplace. And we've all lived in a place where the interstate system, you don't go Route 66, it's not cutting through those cute, quaint towns anymore. It gets you through it and around it. And so what we may need to do is figure out as a community that maybe slowing down, taking a nicer way, leaving a little early, not looking for that speedy route, but also too making our mass transit work for us, making our communities work for us, and reimagining how we grow as a city.
As mentioned in my bio, I grew up in DeSoto, Texas, and so I do have a cognizance of beyond the city limits of Dallas, and this is something that by design, a lot of our southern suburbs have been the most ideal places for our workforce to afford to live. And so this is something that's impactful to more than just Dallasites, more than just my constituents or District 8, 4, and 5 in the city of Dallas, but to a lot of the workforce that we have in DeSoto and Lancaster and Duncanville, Cedar Hill, and even further down. I grew up with both of my parents using this thoroughfare to get to work my entire life. And so, again, I think that we have to look at exactly what Councilmember Blackmon was mentioning, in that hopefully one day this won't be needed, but we've got to get to that point, and we've got to start making decisions and actions as a council that will help get us to that point, and not just make it a talking point and expect it to happen as a byproduct of the real decision, which is what's happening with I-345. We can do that through policy. We can do that through looking at how we can direct our city manager and our economic development incentives, for instance, to focus in large as a ratio to the southern part of our city. But again, I'm not convinced yet, because I've been on the council now for 4 years, and that's not the case. The majority of our economic development incentives are far north of downtown Dallas. It's incentivizing billionaire developers to bring in growth that we need in our city, but we're not focusing on the parts of our city that need that growth the most. When we have decades of predecessors who sat in the seats that we sat on, that by design created a proliferation of lower socioeconomic communities, that by design then did not provide resources needed for quality of life, job opportunities. We've got to be focusing on mixing incomes and opportunity here at home, instead of, again, just hoping it's a byproduct. We've got a ton of land in southern Dallas and in southeast Dallas. And we're talking about beyond even Pleasant Grove out to Seagoville and Forney. I mean, these are the places where the majority of the people that use this thoroughfare are coming from, because what they went to school for, or what they have to offer our economy, doesn't have an opportunity for them to do anything other than use that thoroughfare to get to work. And so that's what I am going to be pushing for, no matter where it looks like the will is to get one decision versus the other. It needs to be coupled with aggressive policy that is going to make now this council look like 20, 30 years from now, to say we had an intent to build that growth in the southern part of our city, instead of it just being an expectation of a byproduct.
I want to make sure you all have a chance to answer. So let me ask you this. Let's say it's torn down. It's a boulevard, cars are redirected, and people say that all this acreage is now freed up, that it's going to create more housing opportunities. And because so much of this is publicly owned, the public and the city council would have the ability to help shape future land use in this area. So what's the economic impact of freeing up this land on 345?
Sure. Well, as mentioned, there's 3 studies, 2 from TxDOT and 1 from a proponent for the boulevard. So it's hard for me to try to gather my head around an accurate number, but some of the numbers that I'm seeing are from $3.5 billion to $4 billion in economic development. What I like about this opportunity is that we will be able to shape the zoning and policy around that land that does become available and open to use. But again, without having an independent study, it's really hard and difficult for us to be able to give a precise number.
And that's part of why this is such an important decision and portends for decades into the future. The Coalition for New Dallas predicted that getting rid of the I-345 overpass would potentially generate 12,000 new housing units, 20,000 jobs, and billions of dollars in economic benefit. Those are amazing statistics, and they are probably estimates, but they underscore the importance of getting this right and making the correct decision on what's the best option here.
And what I want to add to that is you can't correct a right and hurt somebody else too. And I think we're going to cut off communities. And so that's why we have to be very thoughtful in this approach and know exactly what it means for communities. Because let's, as it's been said, both anecdotal and with data, people use this roadway from the southern part of our city. So we can't forget that. And so and I will think that people will not be moving from their neighborhood that they love now into this new neighborhood. I think it will attract newcomers. So I think we need to be very careful about remedying a one wrong, and then what is it going to do to other communities, and those are communities of color as well. So we have to be very thoughtful in this approach.
Yeah, and I think it's important to see, are we looking for investing in the economy or in equity? That I don't believe that we're talking the same if we are doing one. It has to be both. And so the numbers can be very enticing. The numbers can look like, why would we not do this? This is once in a lifetime. But then you also got to continue to remind yourself about the past and why we got here. And so if the economic impact to our city isn't something that repairs the reason that it was put up in the first place, then are we really getting a return on our investment? Is this really catering to an ecosystem of the economy of the city of Dallas that already exists? Or are we providing new opportunity for those who have been inequitably invested in our past? And that's where this has been a very hard balance in my mind in trying to figure out what the best route is. Because again, that economic impact, a lot of my constituents who live in South Dallas are going to say, well, what am I going to see from that? We can bring billions of dollars of development and growth to our city that's just the same distance that it's been the majority of our economy lately, but then what's going to happen? And that's where I've got to really be focused on is we're going to have to be willing to invest in a solution that is almost taking a hit in some sense in order for it to truly be equitable. If it's nothing but a net positive of an investment, then again, I know who's being forgotten about through those decisions.
I know we spent a lot of time talking about equity and that being a part of this. And as you all are contemplating these decisions, are people really thinking about the mobility data as they come up with this plan? Because it seems like a lot of the conversation is about economic impact. And I don't know if people are paying attention to the southern sector and southern Dallas in terms of commute times. And so if this happens, what will it do to that community? Any thoughts on mobility data? Because we know the jobs are actually, a lot of them are up north and people are commuting. So what do you think the impact of any of those decisions, whether it's the hybrid or the leveling down to become a boulevard, what do you think that will do in terms of that kind of economic impact and the added travel?
The reason I've been most supportive of the hybrid option at this point has been because exactly what you asked, Doctor. You have the TxDOT studies that has given us, that is their lane. And I think that's where a lot of is moving people. I saw a couple of eyes back there. But that was what the question was. And that is literally the data that I'm focused on more than where the proponents of boulevards, their talking points are much more focused on the economic impact. And that's where we have to find that balance, because I look at TxDOT as it's literally the entity that is meant to move people in our state. If that is not something that we are looking at as what that commute is, and I've heard, City Lab's study says, I think 7 minutes or something along those lines would be added to a commute. I don't know how many of the people that did that study have used this on a regular morning, but I think that's extremely far-fetched. And if anything, it is still anecdotal. So I am focused on how it's going to move, because that's the reality. That's where the jobs are. That's what needs to be used. And that's what I mean by that balance, is that if we've got 18 acres of developable land, but you're telling me to think about it because we could have 100, that's not focused on the moving the people problem. And if we can have a solution that actually provides some developable land, connects communities, and still allows for that thoroughfare to be an efficient way to get to jobs because of our decisions from the past, then that's why I've seen it as the most viable.
Great question. That's something that weighs heavily on me, making sure that we're not cutting off jobs in the short term, right? To me, I look at this as a much longer project. And as mentioned, we don't know when this is going to happen. It might be 15 and it might be 30 years. In that time, we hopefully as a city should invest in our southern sector and bringing those jobs. So it's not overnight that we're tearing this highway down and that people are not going to be able to get connected to their jobs overnight. There's still going to be alternatives, 75, 30, 35, to be able to get people. And again, looking at the data and analysis of how much time it's actually going to add is something that I think an independent study will be able to tell us without being biased from those who are going for a boulevard-only option, but also to those that want to get traffic with TxDOT from point A to B as fast as they can.
And I think one of the opportunities this gives us, and one of the attractions of the boulevard option, is that we can separate the through traffic that's going to Oklahoma City and points north from the local traffic, so that the through traffic can divert along I-30 to 635 or up Stemmons Freeway and reduce the traffic volumes that we need to accommodate for the strictly Dallas area traffic along this route.
But can I ask Paul a question? Yes. I mean, if you divert all that traffic, have you been on I-35, I-30? I mean, if it's diverted to there, let's just say 100,000 more cars, I don't know if it even has the capacity to absorb that. Just a thought.
I think the more viable option is to go east on I-30, because at rush hour, all the traffic, the local traffic, is coming inbound to downtown. Not much is going outbound. And so there is unused capacity to divert around the city by going east on I-30 and then up 635.
And I love these conversations.
No,
you know,
sorry.
as we're looking at the job market today and coming out of COVID, those who are going into the office have gone from 5 days a week to some to 3 to some to 2. And so I don't see that trend changing. You look at our downtown office space, and a lot of those offices are being converted to residential. And so I think traffic counts, the way they're studied and the way they're calculated today, are not going to be the same way we calculate traffic in 10 to 15 years.
The Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, third fastest growing metro area in the country. With that said, it's much more than just Dallas that we've got to be looking at. And we see an aggressive effort to attract corporate relocation. A lot of our tech jobs and corporations that have come to the Metroplex, there's a direction that they're all going, if y'all have, and it's not the South. And so by being rerouted to 35, I mean, not only do I want to have an option to go to Choctaw and not just WinStar, you know, if I'm going up to Collin County, that's a different route, you know, and when you're going to Oklahoma, for instance, that border, I mean, you've really separated a lot of landmass, and that's the whole point of being able to move cars in an efficient manner. So again, I think that's kind of a byproduct, and you want my constituents to be the ones that have to figure out a different route, to figure out another way to go. And that's where I feel is, where are we focusing? Where are we focusing the investment? Is the return on the investment what we're looking for to add to our tax base or to perpetuate inequities from decisions of our past? Because it doesn't show me that we're doing both if the focus is what the biggest price tag could be because of development in our city.
So this will be my last question before I open it up. You can see this is a spirited group. And I love the dialogue, but I want to give you all the opportunity to be able to ask some questions, because I'm sure you have several. And I want to ask you, you all are having a meeting on May 8th, correct? To kind of talk about the vote that's scheduled in June. There's been a memo submitted requesting an independent study of the options ahead. What's the rush? And do you all feel you have all the information you need to make this once in a generation decision around the fate of our city?
I don't think I have all the information needed. I've asked TxDOT multiple questions, both in person, through email, and have yet to receive those responses. One of the biggest one for me is, what are we going to do to deck and cap the proposed hybrid option? There is no cost figures to do that. There is no plan on how we're able to do that. If that's the case, we end up with a 75, and that means anyone that goes from Haskell across from East Dallas to Uptown, you're taking your life in the hands playing Frogger, just trying to get across 75, and that's the result we're going to get if we move forward today without asking those questions, without having those studies. I believe that that's a tentative meeting. I don't think it's been confirmed yet, but that is the proposed date, and yeah.
I agree with Councilman Moreno. I don't have all the information because I don't think TxDOT has all the answers that we need to the questions that we are posing. I will not be ready to vote to approve the hybrid option on May the 8th. And in fact, I'm one of the signatories on the memo that raised the idea of commissioning an independent consultant hired and paid for by the city, not by TxDOT, to look at all of the issues that we have been talking about today and to provide us updated answers to replace the outdated information that TxDOT's proposal is based upon.
So I too have more questions. Mine's more around the economics and the cost. And I do believe that we do have a generational decision to make, which means that we need to have very thoughtful conversations. But I don't oppose TxDOT looking and moving forward. I just would like to reserve my right to change my decision if so need be, if more information comes out. Because I do feel that we need to make sure that we are not hurting other communities for to do one thing. And, but I do want to know, and I do want to think of it in a more broader text of how this opportunity is going to grow a part of our city that has been neglected for years. And that's my question. So to me, it's not just an infrastructure question, but it's actually a community and city development question. And I just hope that if we look into it and if it passes, TxDOT, you know, maybe that's what we do is put a little clause in there that says we have the right to change our mind, you know, in a certain time frame if it looks like it's going that way. But I do feel that information is going to come out as we move along, and we should be able to say, you know what, this is new information and we need to revisit this.
You know, I'll be perfectly honest. If a vote was up next week, I'd know exactly how I'm going to vote, and I'm ready for it. And that's because I know who I represent, and I know who's going to be mostly impacted. I've yet to see a independent study that the focus has been to address inequities of our city's past. That has been one that will allow us to make a decision that may not be the most economically viable for the city's tax base, but more for bringing in resources. I have a big problem with going in the direction to where we're going to, as a city, put hundreds of millions of dollars into infrastructure improvements when I have constituents who just want a sidewalk on their street. When I have neighborhoods who would like to see basic quality of life and opportunity that they have been plagued with, again, by intent. So if we were to go forward, I definitely think that us as a council need to have the opportunity to revisit and explore what studies could show us how to maximize. But I believe that we could be aggressive, we can be progressive, and still find that the hybrid model is meant to be a compromise. We can all be happy here and bring in development and connect neighbors here in the Central Business District while still allowing for those who are mostly impacted because of the inequities of our city to not continue to be a stepchild in big generational decisions of our city, and just hope that the future will allow for those inequities to balance out. That's not what I see with any other option other than keeping a clear and efficient route for Southern Dallas to get to our job market while still looking at ways. Now, the capping of the highways, that's something we could be doing, but that's what I mean by looking at these studies and seeing how viable it can be to pass that on to our private sector. I don't want us to continue to spend dollars to cap highways in our Central Business District like we've done with Clyde Warren Park, for instance. Again, I have communities that I serve that don't even have a park, or that have been, their playgrounds have been taken away from their parks. But meanwhile, we have a government, we have a mindset in our city that this is the economic engine, the Central Business District, so we're gonna keep pumping all of the dollars there, and we're going to allow for the lack of quality of life and assets for the southern part of our city to exist. And that's not okay, and that can't be okay. And I do believe that that's the beauty of a 14-1 government, because I don't represent the city at large. I represent a constituency that by large, no matter if you're in the southeast part or the far east part, they need this thoroughfare. They need an option to get from the east and the southeast to the northern part of our city where the majority of our job market exists.
Okay, I want to open it up to you all. Would you state your name? And if you're with media, please let us know. But please state your name. Stand up,
Yes,
please.
hi. Yeah, my name's Pablo. I'm a reporter with KERA. I've talked to Paul Ridley recently, actually, about this. And I know I've also talked to Councilmember Moreno about this, or about other things. But I do want to say, you know, I'm curious about the input from residents and businesses, especially in Deep Ellum, it being such a integral part of our, you know, our cultural identity here in Dallas. So have you had you know, an outreach efforts, you know, for residents and businesses in Deep Ellum?
I heard the second part. I think I got the first part. It's basically, have I had communication with the Deep Ellum community?
Yes.
Sure, thank you. So Deep Ellum has definitely gone through waves of great progress, and then also where we've seen a lot of businesses close. So this is absolutely a thought that I have gone to the businesses, because I want to make sure whatever we do minimizes the impact to those businesses that have been in Deep Ellum for 50, 40, 30 years. And I want to ensure that they're able to survive during any type of construction. None of these project outlines have given us a time frame of construction or the impact to the immediate community. And so yes, I have conversations with the Deep Ellum Foundation. I have conversations with the businesses, the residents that live there. With more residents coming into Deep Ellum, we see there's multiple cranes in Deep Ellum right now. We have 2 beautiful parks within walking distance to Deep Ellum, but people cannot get to those parks safely. And so, yes, we have those conversations with our stakeholders.
Okay. And I have one more question. So what happens, you know, if this independent consultant, if that goes through and they recommend a hybrid option, but residents want the boulevard option? What do you think about that? What do you think you would decide?
Residents that live where?
Let's say, you know, residents in South Dallas.
So if that were the case, then I probably would have a different outlook. But this is a pretty easily unanimous decision that I have. I don't have a neighborhood association that's advocating as a proponent for boulevards. I don't see a constituency group in South Dallas or Southeast Dallas that are urging for us to pump more hundreds of millions of dollars into the Central Business District. That's just not existent with my constituents. So that question with how diverse each neighborhood or district of our city is a little bit too vague. because there could be residents that live in Deep Ellum that are looking for that urban lifestyle that may want to see that drop down, but their want isn't a consideration for how it will impact mine, and vice versa. My constituents' outlook on it is how it impacts them directly, and they're not looking at the benefit for those who live in our urban core and what that would bring to their quality of life. So that it's a little too vague of a question just to answer on if residents are saying, because when this time comes, we're going to see opponents and proponents for either option, no matter what it is that comes down the pipeline.
I'll just add really quickly to that. TxDOT did do a survey, and they presented that, but they did not give us zip codes to go with those surveys, and that's something, again, that I've asked for.
Okay, thank you so much.
I'll go with you next. I'm going to get.
Hi, so my name's Stephanie. I'm actually a resident of D7. I live in the Dolphin Heights neighborhood. My husband grew up near Jubilee Park in District 2. And I guess I have a lot of thoughts because, yeah, I've had to use this thing all the time. One of the things about it is we get diverted already. If you guys use Google Maps, we got to take Haskell all the time. I have to take 30 to 635 to get up to North Dallas. I used to have to do that to get to my job in Addison. My question is, I understand that the urgency of now is getting people through it, right? And I guess maybe what we haven't talked about enough, I only got here for this last session, was the fact that this highway was built to separate the southern part. A trench keeps that separated still. A highway like 75 keeps that separated still. We can build deck parks, sure, we're gonna need private funding for that. Clyde Warren Park has not brought the community together. Will this? I don't think so, to be quite honest. So I just wanted to kind of put my voice towards the people who do live in South Dallas, who have to use this. I would, just what are your thoughts on really the bigger picture of what Dallas could look like, not what it is now? And maybe a boulevard option would, I get putting the cart before the horse, but sort of making it so that people have access to those things, to those parks that we don't currently have. We have to use our cars to get anywhere, everywhere in this city. What if we didn't have to? Thank you.
What if
No,
you
thank
had
you. Thank you for your question. And I agree. I'd love to get to a place where cars were not the focus. And again, I had to be cognizant of the reality whenever I say that has to be at the forefront of what I believe is going to be our best option. Because until there is another option, until you can tell me that there is a job market that has been created here, until we have invested in some of those infrastructure needs to alleviate the impact that this would have on those who need this on an everyday basis, then it is cart before the horse. And the reality is this isn't the only highway that was built to segregate us. If the answer to segregation was just to simply make actions to undo those from the past, we're talking about decades. This decision was made, but because it stayed there as long as it did, we've got so much more to consider for thinking that taking this down is going to repair that. You're right, it's not going to magically wave a wand over and communities are now connected. Because what we still have is an issue of former redlining, is an issue of a proliferation of multifamily and lower socioeconomic in certain areas. We still have the inability to show a big box grocery store that we have enough of a household income average for them to come into our neighborhoods. Without any of the investment going to address those issues, dropping this down it's a great heartfelt talking point to say that that's the intent of what it's going to happen. But it's something that has created and perpetuated decades of neglect and segregation cannot be fixed with one action. Just can't across our city. And this is one example of many. And I know it's a topic that we're talking about, but Interstate 30 is a huge barrier for different socioeconomics of our city. And the answer to that isn't to take that away, because what would we be in East Dallas without Interstate 30? I love that we're going to be looking at remodeling it and seeing how that can be depressed so that we can aesthetically be more connected to the other neighborhood. But I don't think that that's going to magically create a mixed income model for the communities that have been intentionally segregated from.
So do you still work in Addison and you have to travel? Okay, because what I would hope is that you're right, we did not invest in parts of our communities with parks and retail and job opportunities. And so if we could take a little bit of time and do that, then maybe you wouldn't need to use it. And so, because, I mean, a simple thing such as a park and a library should be in your community. That is a no-brainer. And then we as a city should really incentivize bringing in those jobs and office complexes and grocery stores, so you don't have to use a roadway. And so we want you to stay in the community easily. And so that was kind of how I'm thinking about this. If we've got 30-year runway here before that thing comes down, then what if we invest in communities right now that are affected, and then it organically goes away? And so we need to have this conversation about revisiting it every check-in points, like, is this option that we're moving towards still a viable option? Because we don't want to cut people off.
And I guess, I'm sorry, thank you, but one of my things, earlier you said TxDOT, they're kind of experts in this because they move people, but they move cars, right? They don't move people, they move cars. In South Dallas, people are on their bikes, people are on foot, people are on buses. Like me and my husband, we have 1.5 cars, I like to say, and it's hard to get around. So I don't know, I find that if the hybrid option is the best option, and the independent study says that, then why not spend the money to get that independent study instead of however much it costs versus the billions of dollars it's gonna cost to bring it down, to build a trench. Sorry, thank you.
I think you make excellent points, and I'm not opposed to it. I know how our budget works. And I know that if TxDOT's not going to pay for a boulevard option, you're literally asking us to figure out a way to cut into hundreds of millions of dollars into our general fund budget. Meanwhile, I have neighbors that don't have sidewalks. I have the inability to provide economic development incentives in the South because of our budget is spread as thin as it is. So it's a balance, but I don't want the decision to be made with the hope or intent that we're going to address the exact issues that you had. Unless we have aggressively done so as a city, then I'm not convinced that those issues will be made priority when we have the ability now to incentivize $1 billion of growth, because that's where the focus is going to be with our city government. It's not going to be like, oh, look, a magic wand was waved. We need to start working on the quality of life for South. Where have we been?
When we're talking about the budget, and if TxDOT doesn't move forward and we move forward with the boulevard option, right now, yes, the city would have to pay for that, but there's alternatives. There is, it doesn't have to come from our general obligation dollars. We can find different revenue sources to pay for the boulevard option. And I'm not, again, I'm not a urbanist, I'm not an architect, so I can't tell you how much this is going to cost, but I can guarantee you that decking and capping is going to be far exceeding the cost to boulevard and option. So,
Mr. Moreno, I'd like to ask you, if you think that this is going to be something that we could leverage other funding sources from, then why do we have $4 billion worth of street maintenance in our city?
for those options.
We've got potholes that can't be repaired across our entire city from every single corner and crevice. And if we can't invest to make sure that our infrastructure that currently exists is up to par, I think it's just, again, a hope, this expectation that's out there that's going to allow us to make a huge decision just thinking that we're going to be able to add something that we already currently cannot do. We currently add $150 million for street repair in our budget. Every year, $150 million. We have $4 billion worth of deferred maintenance. We're not even scratching the surface with the roads that currently exist in our city under our jurisdiction. So just adding to that expense, to me, is not prudent, is not, and overall is looking at one facet of this conversation instead of a holistic approach to how it impacts our city.
Good, thank you. Thank you all for your presentation. My name is Caleb Roberts. I presented just before this, and I would love for you all to hear that presentation. I don't know if some of you all got to hear the talking points, because we do focus on South Dallas. And I think that was the main thing we wanted to bring about with this presentation, is the focus on South Dallas. So I hope we get to do that in the future, because I think it's very important and touches a lot of the points that you all discussed. I have really two questions. One is, we've talked about removing I-345, but that's based on TxDOT's option. How do we feel about the additional option, or the extended version, which does remove part of 45 down to MLK, Peabody, that kind of thing, because I think that does talk a little bit more about South Dallas. But another thing is, one thing that we made in our presentation, one point was about how the highway siphons a lot of the traffic that would be in South Dallas to north. So there's a lot of underutilized roads in South Dallas. Good Latimer, Botham Jean, Harwood. A lot of these are at half or a third of their capacity. And what that means is, if you looked at Jerry and Amber's presentation about the history, they talked about a thriving Freedmanstown. And I think what we're doing by siphoning the highway and having that traffic go on the highway is preventing from South Dallas residents from being entrepreneurs and having that traffic go along their streets, and being able to utilize some of the things that people who would be on the highway would have to utilize. Those communities would have to visit those restaurants, those retail places, owned and operated by Southern Dallas. So our point is, not only is the highway, historically bad, but right now it's taken away from the ability of South Dallas to have economic development in their own area. And that was the point of our conversation. So I think some of that is kind of what we've been focused on, is how does the highway also siphon the ability from South Dallas to do the things that they were doing 50 and 60 years ago already at a very high level? So thoughts on that?
Sure. So we've seen Cesar Chavez Boulevard, where the Dallas Farmers Market is. And when the city invested in the market, we've seen what can happen, the economic development. Now we see mom and pops, minority businesses inside the market, when it was a virtual ghost town just 7 years ago, right? You look at Harwood, you look at Good Latimer, those are all roads that go through the Cedars that just 10 years ago, there was nothing happening in the Cedars. It was vacant. I mean, there was very little development happening. But we can't just leave the roads the way they are. I think Councilmember Bazaldua was exactly right. We have to invest in the roads. Cesar Chavez was built like an expressway, getting people in and out of Dallas as fast as we could. Those large green I-30 signs that we were just talking about, the lack of on 345, there's plenty of them on this short stretch on Cesar Chavez. And so we have to redesign those streets. We have to re-engineer them so they're, some of them are one-way streets. We have to divert those to bi-directional streets with bike lanes, with crosswalks. So it is going to be an investment from the city to be able to pay for some of that. But I think the return, or the return of businesses coming into it with property taxes, with sale taxes, we will be able to fund those.
I think that so a lot of the examples that were just mentioned on thoroughfares are good examples. However, the majority of where that growth has existed is still north of 30. And that's where my issue has been. This is again cart before the horse in my eyes, to think that this would be a magic fix. Now, yes, funneling the cars through South Dallas would be great, but until we address the zoning that has been there, that has hindered retail from coming, until we make it more of an equitable system so that small business owners can participate in that economic growth, then it's again cart before the horse to just think that just because we're funneling cars to come through our neighborhood, that all of a sudden there's going to be a demand that has never existed. The reality is we have places like Bonton Farms, for instance, that has created an ecosystem of a demand from all over the city. Nothing had to change for that to happen. We just needed to get something viable to bring and attract the economy that is now being spent down there. That's something that we've worked with the South Dallas Fair Park Area Plan so that we can start to address holistically the zoning, because the zoning has been something that has really held us back in the South. And without that changing, I don't think that there's this anecdotal approach to bringing in the demand. I think the demand would be there if we had the ability for a better retail to exist, restaurants to exist, catering business to exist. And right now, that's not the case, and that's why they don't exist right now. And when you need $20,000 at the very beginning just to even start the process to have a consultant to go through a zoning change, we're already speaking to it not being conducive to the business owners that exist currently in South Dallas, but more for those who want to come and open up shop in our community. And that's what I want to make sure that we are addressing first, because if we're going to have a growth opportunity, if we're really going to grow South, it needs to come from who is currently the South. It doesn't need to come from what is going to look like a new.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, my name's Chonga Higgins. I'm a District 7 resident. I've lived all around District 7, from South, East Dallas, South Dallas. And, I just like to say, quite frankly, to your point, I go around 345. Like, I've been diverting the whole time that I've lived in Dallas around 345 because of the traffic. And so when we talk about how important it is to get from, and I've also lived in Oak Cliff and lived in Lancaster and DeSoto, and we're already diverting around 345. Like, the traffic is already going around 345. To hear you say that it is something that is so needed for people that come from the southern sector over into the work, and I've worked in IT for the last 25 years. All my jobs are out on Technology Boulevard, Plano, whatever. I've always lived south. And so I don't take that highway to get to work. I don't, even when I live in, people that I know that live in South Dallas, they don't go on it, they go around it. They go around all the highways because it's so congested. And then they get on the highway once they get out of downtown or the South Dallas area. Like, we're diverting around it already. So, anyway. So I'm just saying, like, I hear what you're saying, Councilman Bazaldua, and you are right. Like, there's been a systemic neglect in the investment that's supposed to happen in the southern sector of the community. But I do not think when we're talking about restorative justice, when we're talking about, we talk all of this about the design that created 345 and these other highways, which destroyed the social fabric of South Dallas in the first place. So we can't talk about all of that and then say, oh, well, because the numbers don't add up, or oh, because this don't add up, we can't do it. No, the same both and energy that y'all had when you were talking about the hybrid plan and all of that, keep that both and energy when you're talking about restorative justice. Restorative justice ain't gonna be economically feasible all the time. It ain't gonna be practical all the time. It's not gonna make sense all the time. It ain't gonna make white business community comfortable. But if you really wanna do something progressive, and if you really wanna do something revolutionary, you say tear that damn highway down and let's create some opportunities that are equitable. Not just big white developers coming in, but you force them to develop in a way that brings jobs from people that are from South Dallas into that area back that was there before that highway was there. There's a way to do what you're talking about doing, and it doesn't have to be this same model, this same paradigm, this same Kodak that we hear when we hear city council talk about development, highways, transportation. It's the same model all the time. And you can't talk all that stuff about restorative justice. You can't talk all that about equity and then turn around and say, oh, when the numbers don't add up, whatever, I don't understand. We're not saying it's a magic fix, right? We're saying you do it now for the future of our babies. You understand what I'm saying? It ain't about what's happening right now. It's about the future, you know? And so, no, to say, oh, we can hope that it'll be organically done in 30 years. Look, let me tell you something. Black folks, brown folks, and people that live south of 30, been hoping that the city do something different all these years. No, we want action. We don't want hope. Tear the highway down. Let us figure out a plan that's equitable for everybody in the community and stop playing these games and spinning around with these ideas and these concepts. Quit playing and let's get something done.
I appreciate your comments. And I said actually a lot of your points. It's not going to be most economically viable. That's literally what I said. And I know that your community that's north of 30, up along 30, that they absolutely are against what this is. So I am speaking to holistically of the neighborhoods in the district, not only on the eastern part where you live, but also in the southern part. So I do believe that there has to be a holistic approach, and okay, I'm not trying to get in a dialogue with you, but so that is literally what I said, that there can't be something economically viable that is also addressing restorative justice. And that's literally been why I have had a pushback on what's been proposed. So thank you for your comments.
So let me say the doors of the church are open with what you just said. Thank you so much for that comment. I know that we only have a few minutes left. You can applaud if you want, because that was good. I know we only have a few minutes left, and I want to honor that by letting each of you give your final thoughts in 5 minutes so that we can close. No, not each of y'all, 5 minutes. Total, cumulative 5 minutes to give your final thoughts on this topic, and then we'll close out.
I think I've been clear where I stand, so I'll just say thank y'all for being here. And I don't really have much more to say, but I'd love to hear from y'all if you have any opinions. I'm sure I'm going to be seeing a lot of y'all's tweets and stuff, so bring them on.
I also want to thank you all for being here. This has been a very enlightening discussion, and I've enjoyed your questions. I think we need to get the data and the facts before we make a decision. The information we have now is outdated because it was gathered before the pandemic and before people changed their lifestyles. So we need to update that, and we need to have the opportunity to look at this from the perspective, the many perspectives of city residents, not just from TxDOT's perspective.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you for having us. I really want to say thank you to the audience. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for caring. Thank you for your engagement, because we want to make sure we listen from those who are going to be affected by this, not just the ones in my district, but I want to hear from those who are south and north as well, because this is a decision that's going to affect everyone. We will have a community panel coming up, and I hope that you are there. I hope that you call on your friends and your neighbors to show up, to give your input, to give your thoughts. And for me, I'm not ready to be able to vote on this just yet.
And I echo my colleagues. Thank you for being here. I came in earlier and there was nobody here when somebody was speaking, and I thought, oh my gosh, nobody's going to show up. So I appreciate you being here. I read this stuff. I still, as my colleagues say, there's a lot more question than answers, and there's a lot more data that needs to happen, and a lot more conversations. And what we're seeing, like with our TxDOT colleagues, is that it's a lot of this, and this. You take it or leave it, and there needs to be more of no, no, no. There needs to be some pushback. And that's what I would like to see happen, because I think we have an opportunity here and we shouldn't miss it.
I want to thank our panel, Councilman Moreno, Councilmember Ridley, Councilmember Bazaldua, Councilmember Paula Blackmon, and I want to thank you for your engagement. Please continue having these conversations and asking questions and speaking truth to power. Thanks again. Thank you.
So final thank you to Dr. Froswa Booker-Drew for moderating today. She did a great job. I encourage you all, this concludes programming for Paul Quinn College here at the EJ conference. Thank you all on behalf of the college. Please engage in the diorama and show us what you want to see. The space is open, the canvas is blank. Thank you all.